I love complaints and think there's such a wealth of insight and opportunity. You really keep checking in and seeing if it's still relevant. And even if it is, it's still validating, okay, good, we're on the right path. One poor decision can really dent that trust. That kind of magical moments where they're going to say, that 2-second comment I, took to write.
Welcome back to the CX Insider podcast. I'm your host, Alicia, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Greg, and a very special guest, Lee Holloway, who is the Head of Customer Experience at APS Bank. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So maybe we could just kickstart the episode with a really quick, simple one. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey?
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, I'm Head of Customer Experience at a bank in Malta in the south of Europe. I'm originally from the south of England, so from not far from here where we're filming today in London. But I've lived in Malta for 9 years and been with my current company for just over 6. My entryway into CX was through feedback and complaints management. And my career was always kind of picking up things that other people didn't necessarily gravitate towards or didn't want to do. So my very first job in a pet shop, I ended up becoming the reptile specialist, feeding all the snakes and kind of reptiles, because a lot of the other staff didn't want to work with the reptiles. So it just kind of happened naturally. And then the same with complaints. In a lot of places I've worked, people kind of want to run the other way. I love complaints and think there's such a wealth of insight and opportunity. And it's so rewarding. Every day is so different and it's very varied, which for me I find really enriching. And from there, obviously wanting to make the improvements from the complaints, the kind of broader VOC work, and then into CX management. So that's been my kind of career path in a nutshell. And the thing I find with CX is that no two journeys are the same. Everyone's got a slightly different story of how they kind of found themselves working in the field, but often with kind of similar trends along the way.
Must be very rewarding as well, won't it? Like you say, being able to turn customer, I guess, experiences from being maybe quite a negative starting point sometimes to into resolving that issue is quite rewarding.
I think even complaints being negative, it is the natural human response, but I even try to flip that on its head, because some of the countries that have the highest happy index ratings, some of the kind of Scandinavian, Nordic countries, actually have really high complaint rates. And it's often a sign of a really well-functioning society. And they have high complaint rates because, one, they know they'll be listened to and there's a benefit to actually complaining. And they feel that they're actually helping improve their services, including public services and, private services, of course, as well. In countries where they don't feel that's the case, there's often lower complaint rates because they don't feel like anything will happen. So they think, why should I bother? And they're just kind of disengaged with the whole kind of system, I guess. So I think high complaint is a really good thing. It's just important that they're listened to and that obviously you're acting on that feedback.
I didn't know that. That's really good to know.
I mean, that's actually perfect for the first question. So obviously, as we mentioned, or as Greg said, negative complaints can seem a little bit daunting. So how can you turn that into something positive and rewarding within customer experience?
I think, first of all, that kind of defensiveness is often coming from a good place from the employees, because they should care about where they work. So when they feel that maybe to them that it's under attack or under threat by criticism, they might become defensive. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that is the human response. I think we just need to train ourselves to look beyond that. And actually, most of the time you can find common ground with whatever the criticism is. And most of the time you can say, if I was in the customer's shoes, I'd probably be feeling the same way. But the most important thing is seeing, do other customers, are they experiencing this, and how can we improve it? And if you're working continuously, to improve and use that feedback as part of your continuous improvement cycles, your business is going to be so much better for it. And then you'll see a reduction in complaints ultimately. So I see too many companies approaching complaints a bit like a compliance requirement that they have to kind of tick. And I think for us, we would do everything the same, even if all the regulation went away, because we don't approach it as a compliance obligation. Yes, it happens to be in our market because it's heavily regulated like many sectors, but we see all the benefits to the business of doing it well. So I think more businesses need to look beyond it kind of being something they have to do and see it something they really should be doing and doing well. And it should be, feeding through the whole organization. It shouldn't be just the complaints team that know what's kind of upsetting customers and what's going wrong. That insight must go through the organization so that all the decisions that you're making are then factoring in that insight. So that's really crucial, is that too often I also see the insight kind of locked within the complaints management function, who by themselves can make very little change. Most of the problems are not going to be within their remit, right? So they have to pass that through the business.
Well, that actually leads perfectly to, I guess, a question I would have off the back of that is, how do you unlock that? So how do you take all the data you're collecting, you're monitoring the calls, you're monitoring the emails, I'm sure you're interpreting that data in many different ways that maybe we can get into later, but how do you actually take that data and then turn it into actual change that the customer feels?
It's a really good question. And the thing is, when you say about analysing the data, it's not a numbers game necessarily, because especially with more minor annoyances that are not maybe the biggest kind of disruptive force in the business, customers might not formally complain that often. So sometimes we get 1 or 2 customer complaints and it can show us that there's a problem or something that we can improve. Or it could be something that's deteriorating that could continue getting worse if we don't take kind of remedial action. So it's a really tricky one, because it's not just a numbers game of where is there the highest volume of complaints. But it is definitely seeing also trends and what can be improved. In terms of turning it into improvements, it really is about working with all the stakeholders across the business, because they have to want to affect the change. So with customer experience in general, but also complaints management, most of the areas that you're going to need to change are not within your remit, they're elsewhere. So you really have to get the other stakeholders on board to want to make those changes. And when they see the benefit for them, you really start to win people over, and they start to want to make those changes. And if it's a really customer-centric organization, they're going to want to do something about it if there's something within their area that is causing an issue for customers. But it's about being that guiding light, is what I see for the complaints management team, saying this is what's not working for customers. And it's important to always go with solutions, because if you just pick holes in what you're doing but you can't suggest a better way of doing it, it doesn't really help anything. So kind of brainstorming some solutions. When you're not sure, make your customers part of it. So when we do get complaints and we're really not sure how to improve something, we'll often ask them, what would you do? Or can you think of, a way we could make this better for you? And customers often are our greatest source of, ideas. We steal all our best ideas from our customers. So it's just listening a lot of the time. And the colleagues as well, mind you, because especially those who are customer facing, they're really close to the customer. So they have a great wealth of insight because they're dealing with them every day. And that's something that some companies don't gather enough of, is asking colleagues, what are customers saying about this on the ground? So if you do those 2 things, it will kind of lead the way into where you should be going.
That's actually genius. We've talked a lot about in the internal side of the business and the complaint management. We've actually not heard a huge amount of people say that they really consult with their colleagues to get that. Because like you say, they might be able to interpret or elaborate on what's causing a pain. But I guess they can also, like you say, probably share the right ideas. Actually, if we just did this, it would probably solve the problem for our customers, because they are, like you say, tip of the spear, front line. They are literally speaking to the customers. That's so clever.
It's so important. And one of the things we do, because with our customer experience strategy, for example, I didn't want it to just be another document that kind of gets lost on the intranet and forgotten about. So we do regular workshops on an annual basis with all teams, not just customer facing, to help them connect the work they're doing to what we're trying to deliver in terms of the desired experience. And we always say to them, or I always say to my colleagues, you are the closest to your processes and you're handling these things every single day. So you're the best place to see, is this the best way to do it? And it's about kind of seeing what are we actually trying to do here, rather than being task oriented. Sometimes if we're so focused on the task, it might not even be delivering what the task was set up for in the first place. It can stray so far from, kind of what it was designed for. So it's just being a bit conscious in our work. And I know when you're busy, it's tough because you're just kind of powering through everything. But I encourage my colleagues to step back and say, is this the best way of doing it? And our colleagues have come up with some amazing ideas. And when they feel that the business listens to them and actually implements them, they're really engaged to give those ideas. I see in companies where colleagues are not kind of volunteering so much insight is when they don't feel like that it will be listened to. So it's really important to show them that, listen, this isn't just a kind of chat over a coffee. If you give us your ideas, we're actually going to do something about it. And when they start seeing those changes, and start with quick wins that are easier to obviously implement, and you'll start to win over that, okay, they're listening here. And then keep collaborating on some of the longer term changes. But colleagues are so important because ultimately they're delivering your customer experience. So it's just as important to take them along on the ride as it is for your customers outside.
I think that's really interesting.
Maybe one quick follow-up actually is, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any working examples? You mentioned about like the workshop that you run, that increases like the collaboration side of things. Do you have any working examples where you can think of? I'm going to drag the question out to give you time to think about maybe an idea, but you know, where a customer's made like a complaint, or you've noticed a series of complaints or frustrations, and then internally there's been some conversation, and then you've been able to turn that around. I think for our audience, sometimes having a real working example, people can super relate to it, because of course, you know, people that listen and watch this podcast are very much those business leaders that are responsible for reshaping or redesigning that customer journey or landscape. So
no, sure. I mean, we have lots of examples, but I think one of the key things is to understand your customer and what they want. I think when businesses, and sometimes really large businesses, make bad decisions, is because they look at kind of the way the market's going. What they're doing makes sense on the surface, but they're not sure, or they haven't even assessed whether it's what their customers want. So when we launched our new internet banking some years back, we only offered the mobile app. We took away the physical kind of token, the dongle. And it was too much too soon, because we went from not even offering an app to kind of only offering it.
Right.
And it excluded some of our customers that we really didn't want to lose, you know, from a business point of view. But obviously we also want to do the right thing by them from a service provider perspective. So we took that feedback on board and reintroduced the physical token. We know that the future is probably, you know, mobile kind of led and so on, but we still saw that there was enough of a demand from our customer base to really make that decision. And that was a big pivot for the business, because it's not the physical token that's the hard part, it's all the software behind it. And my technical colleagues are much better than I am to explain how it works, but we basically had to redesign everything so that there's 2 authentication, you know, methods. But it was important to do that because we have to listen to our customers. And I remember when we did make that change, the feedback we got then from some of those customers was, I didn't think you were actually going to do anything. I was just kind of getting it off my chest. But I'm really impressed that you actually listened.
That's cool.
And there's been a number of examples like this. Some of the best changes are the ones that are equally beneficial to the business and the customer. So we were a bit late than maybe large international banks at digitizing our paper, you know, our bank statements. And customers were crying out for it because they're increasingly environmentally conscious. That's something really important to us. And they were sort of saying, listen, I do everything online. I don't even look at the paper one. By the time it comes through, it just goes straight in the filing cabinet or whatever. So we were able to do that and to give them digital access to their statements. They get them probably quicker because they're not waiting for the post, which is not always the most reliable. They don't have endless statements piling up in their drawers that they don't need. And there's a huge cost saving there because you're not printing, you know, thousands and thousands of statements. So I think those are my favorite changes, when it's equally beneficial to the business and the customer, because a lot of the time it's looked at like it's a trade-off, and I don't think it needs to be. I think if you're clever about it, you can optimize what you're doing in a way that is better for the customer. So it's important not to just look at it like cost cutting, but how can we improve things whilst, you know, improving efficiencies at the same time.
I guess there's probably always a way to look at it in that respect. Like every change, there's got to be benefit to the business. The benefit to the business is at least a happier customer. So there's always a win-win scenario, you could almost argue.
On the train station in the way here from London Bridge, there was a giant billboards all over the station, and the number one tagline that this bank is using is that they have the best customer satisfaction in the country. So I mean, there's many benefits, but it made me realize that one benefit is it's a great, you know, selling tool, because you automatically know every bank's going to try and tell you that they're the best, but if they are the best rated by their own customers, you automatically know that the likelihood is your experience is going to be, you know, in line with the rest of their customers who seem to be having a pretty good time. And life can be hectic and stressful and busy. We all feel it. So any company provider that can make your life and day that little bit easier, you know, is definitely going to be top of your list to work with, right?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Not just a marketing tool. I mean, it will ensure customer loyalty.
Yeah.
And it's a unique selling point as well, because not many businesses or banks especially really care that much about the people. They just kind of doing the processes day in, day out, and especially smaller branches, they can really lose sight of that.
Yeah, I feel that a lot. What you're saying about banks sometimes get a bad rap, and some of it's probably justified across the board. But there are lots of banks, like where I am is different. We're a community bank, and we're really focused on the customer. So sometimes banks are unfairly kind of all tied together.
That's true.
And I think people should, you know, use their voice and make change. But it's important to know that if you're not happy, there are alternatives as well. Don't just kind of grumble and stay put. If you're not happy with how your provider's treating you, go and find a better solution, a better alternative, because it's almost always out there. And I feel like today consumers have more options than ever before.
Yeah.
It's not only the traditional players, there's all these new entrants. So, you know, if you're not receiving the experience you should, you know, change and move. That's an important thing, because inertia unfortunately drives some of those bad experiences, because the companies don't feel like they need to change because people are staying put. So it's important that if they're all dissatisfied, they speak with their feet, as it were. And it will then obviously benefit those that are making a real effort to treat their customers the right way. So I feel like that's good for everyone. The change at consumer level, customers are much more powerful than they realize. That's what my TEDx talk was about. But it's about how don't keep voting for that company. Your pound is like a vote. Take it away and put it somewhere that you support what they stand for, you support their values, they treat you in the right way, because that's all really important. And increasingly today's consumer, it's not just about price, it's not just about the actual service, it's all of those other factors. It is how they make you feel, it is their kind of contribution to society as well. A lot of customers now want to know that there's some type of social cause that's being supported, or whatever it may be. So all of this is really important. And I think what today's customer has as a big advantage is an access to more information than ever before. So they can be so informed that a generation or two ago they wouldn't have had access to that information. So it's really important that we do that, because then you're rewarding the ones that are doing well, and obviously the ones that aren't will have to pick up their game a bit and improve, because they won't want to keep seeing customers leaving.
So true.
So in that sense then, do you think, in your opinion, that there is anything that companies specifically, or banks maybe a bit more specifically, where they do go wrong? Is there kind of like a common blind spot within the industry in customer experience?
I don't know if it's so much a common blind spot, but I think in industries in general, I see it in other sectors where they're kind of always being bashed, or it's kind of always used as an example of terrible customer experience. They might feel like, whatever we do, it's always criticized, and kind of, I don't want to say give up, but they might kind of just accept the fact that they're never going to be the most popular. And I know a head of customer experience at a bank in Budapest, and she came up with this thing: can a bank be truly lovable? Is it possible to love a bank, at its core?
That's cool.
And she did some amazing work and did a whole program, and she actually helped me set ours up, but just giving us some advice and so on. So I definitely think that there's an opportunity in everything. If you are in a sector that's kind of inherently less popular, that's a great opportunity to stand out from all the competitors and to be the kind of exception to the rule, to say, yeah, we are a bank, but we do it differently. And whatever sector you're in, you could be in energy, because they're another one that gets a bad rap. But there are some companies, I was speaking to a Greek energy company, and their customer experience team was really, really focused on the customer in a way that, was really impressive. So the more that your industry is kind of looked at in a negative light, the more you can do to kind of say, okay, let's listen to that. Because that's also an industry that's ripe for disruption. If they kind of collective customer base all feel the same way, it's just waiting for a kind of player to come along and do it and listen to that. So don't wait to be disrupted is my best advice. Take action now. And it's all about listening to customers. But I wouldn't say it's one common blind spot. It's just one of those things where the market in this country especially is moving maybe slightly more away from branch banking, so it's self-service, but it's important not to leave anyone behind. So it's a tough balancing act, because it's also, at the end of the day, banks are doing lots of great work too, and they are providing essential services, in the community. So it's just important to kind of voice your feedback, voice your opinions, and then from the bank's perspectives, it's really important that they listen to it. And if I didn't feel, for example, like our organization did listen to the customer feedback, I would leave straight away. So but definitely, obviously, working in customer experience and customer complaints and feedback, a big part of my job is making sure that it is given high priority in the organization. I'm very fortunate that it is where I am, but I do speak to peers that it's not always the case. So I can understand sometimes that it's harder to get that across, but definitely if there's a problem in our place that affects the customer, everyone right up to the CEO cares about it and is actively involved in solving it. And I think that's what it takes.
That's really cool. Well, you mentioned the CEO there, and that maybe brings me on to a question that I was thinking about is, how do you mentioned about getting other people in the business involved earlier on and in those to drive those changes, but how do you in particular approach like this, like the C-suite or the very senior executive board level, whichever level you're pitching your changes to? How do you approach those conversations? Because I appreciate doing workshops is one thing, but approaching senior leadership conversations is probably a different approach or a different tact you might have to take. How do you generally do that,
So,
basically?
I'm fortunate that I report directly into our CSO, our Chief Strategy Officer, and she's
Okay.
amazing. So I have a strong voice there because she is on the C-suite. But the CEO has been our biggest supporter and champion from the beginning, and that obviously really helps. But we started with a top-down, bottom-up approach. So before we really did anything, we did check in with the C-suite and said, listen, this is what we want to do. This is the direction we're heading in. We can't do it without your support. So just tell us now if you're kind of not fully behind what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And we had a really, really strong amount of support. And the same from our board, actually. It's been amazing, which again is not the same in every organization. So we're very, very fortunate here. But I think when pitching to senior executives and boards, I think it's important to go with a kind of fully fleshed out idea. Because my boss does sit on the C-suite, I see other parts of what she's working on and what's being kind of pitched to her from stakeholders, and sometimes it's like we're passing the decisions up the chain to be taken by someone else, or the problems to be solved by the kind of C-suite to save the day. And I think if it's our area, we need to take the lead on it and really put the plan together. And if you go to any board, any C-suite, and say, here's what we want to do, and it's a plan that's really making sense, that's been really well thought out, I find it hard-pressed that many executives wouldn't support that. I think it's when things are kind of half-baked, kind of just a bit of a box-ticking approach, that they see through that. And I don't blame them, because, you know, they're taking key decisions 5 times a day, if not more.
Yep.
And, you know, they need to make sure the business is on the right path, and they can only go by what you're giving to them. So it's really important to sell your vision effectively, because if you can't get it across to the C-suite, you probably can't get it across to the rest of the business, and then you probably can't connect it to your customers the way you wanted. So it's important to win them over for sure. And it's just about being clear on what you're doing, why you're doing it, how it connects to the broader business objectives, because it should never be separate from that. What's the business's areas of focus, and how is it going to support, you know, that? I think if you connect all of those dots, I think if that's done effectively, you will have the support of the C-suite and the board.
That's really cool. I think C-suite have a very good ability, and I guess this is why they're in the positions that they generally are, of being able to see through a lot of the mist and actually see very clearly what needs to happen. And that's why I think you're absolutely spot on, because the clearer your vision you take to them, the less questions and holes effectively they can pick in the idea and stuff like that. And like you say, you're not pushing the responsibility to them to make a decision. You're saying, no, we've taken responsibility. We've got the plan. We've got as much detail. It might not be perfect. We need your steer on some things, but generally, are we, you know, shooting in the right direction?
Exactly. No, that's spot on. And again, sometimes it's about not trying to do too much. It's really tempting to want to do everything that you want to do, but it's better to do less, do it really effectively, do it well, and also maintain it. Because something that I sometimes see is when things are no longer shiny and new, we kind of drop them and go on to the next thing. But actually, if it was a great initiative, it's still a great initiative, and it needs to be maintained. So the first year I was at the bank, I introduced complaints handling training for all of our customer-facing teams, and we do that every single year. It's annual. So we don't just do something and move on, because you know, staff turnover, and even just, you know, refreshers for the existing stuff. And it's the same with everything we do. It's never a kind of one done and we move on. If it's making sense and it's adding value, and obviously we ask our colleagues, you know, for their feedback here as well, then we'll keep doing it and keep maintaining it. But obviously that means the more you launch, the more you've got to maintain. So you just have to be mindful of it being manageable, and make sure that, you know, you're building in a kind of logical and manageable fashion, sustainable fashion. But if you do that, I really think, and again, you earn, you know, support as you are successful in your initiatives. Everything I've ever pitched to our C-suite has been supported. I've never hit a wall. But it's also because everything we've pitched before has gone on to, you know, resonate with our colleagues, with our customers, and has, you know, added value for the business. So I think it's about earning that authority. And that's why I said start with the quick wins, because sometimes you don't need a lot of approvals to kind of make these small incremental changes that can add up to make a big impact. And then you can move on to kind of some of the bigger things you want to do.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I guess when you go through all the planning, you get the approval from C-suite, one of the things they're going to be very focused on, I guess you also, is how do you measure that success?
Yeah.
So how do you approach, you know, measurements, KPIs? What things for you, I guess, you know, for APS Bank in particular, say very much a community-focused bank, how do you approach KPIs? What is important versus what's maybe not so important, but still something you watch?
As you said, that is a really tough one, and I think is in every business, because sometimes it's those real intangibles that you really feel that human connection, but it's hard to measure that. But there are ways, obviously, and we're not reinventing the wheel here when we're measuring things like CSAT and NPS. But when I started, so I founded our Voice of the Customer team and Customer Experience department, which was, I think, really empowering because we were kind of starting from a blank slate. Obviously, there was some great work already happening. We didn't start from literally nothing, but it was kind of founding the team, building it from ground up. And what that did allow us to do was to kind of build it in a way that made sense. We didn't have legacy processes that were kind of outdated and so on. And we've increased massively our customer insight. So for me, to see if customer experience is working, it has to come from the customer.
Yeah.
As well, colleagues also should provide some input, but your end customer is going to tell you if their experience is how you want it to be. And we've introduced a number of ways to do that at different touch points. So we do the kind of holistic quarterly CSAT surveys, but we also have feedback terminals at our branches, which are collecting a huge amount of feedback, thousands of responses a month. We also have surveys on our contact center lines, and a number of other initiatives, mystery shopping and focus groups and all the usual things. But it's about really listening to those and also bringing it kind of in line with each other. So sometimes we use our unstructured feedback, the complaints, the feedback that's being volunteered, to guide us on where we should focus a research initiative or a mystery shopping, for example. We bring those two together. And it's really important to pay just as much attention to the unstructured feedback. I see companies that almost ignore that and then focus really hard on a survey they've just commissioned because it can really neatly be analysed into charts and, a kind of report. But it's just as important that your customers that are volunteering feedback to you every day, that's also being given just as much weight. And I think if you do that, then definitely you'll see if you're on the right track, because you'll see through customers if things are moving in the right direction. Things can move slightly from one quarter to the next or 1 year to the next, but you can see from that subtle change if it's going in the right direction or the wrong direction. And what that does allow businesses to do is to kind of take any corrective action or remedial action before a problem gets worse and more damaging to the business. So it's about really keeping your finger on the pulse. And something else I see is that companies maybe do a big exercise to kind of measure something and sort of think it's done. And it's obviously not done.
That's
you have to
so
keep
true.
measuring and it does change. I mean, the pandemic was a fantastic example of this. All the data we had pre-COVID is probably totally obsolete within 6 months of the pandemic. So you have to really keep checking in and see, is this still relevant? And even if it is, it's still validating, okay, good, we're on the right path. But often there will be changes over time in what customers want.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day, just about how actually like technology, and we'll talk more about technology maybe shortly, but how technology is moving so fast, that's having a real knock-on effect, I think, it always does, but in what customers expect from their experience and, like say, where their priorities lie. And because of the rate of acceleration of the tech changes and other changes in therefore processes, I think it just accelerates everything else. And that is like what customers expect and what they need and what they want is just so you have to constantly measure. You can't just have this done, all right, we'll revisit that in 3 years from now, because in the next 3 years the landscape is going to change 4 times, and maybe you missed those 4 changes and therefore you're now out of line. Is that what you mean as such?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And in that period, if you use the 3 years as an example, you might continue moving in the wrong direction on something.
That's true.
When you could have pivoted, way earlier. So it's really, and obviously it's not easy to pivot on certain areas of the business, but the earlier you can do that, typically the easier that will be, rather than continuing down the wrong path, let's say, and then realizing later that actually it's not working. And when you mentioned briefly about the evolving technology changing customer expectations, let's not forget they're also using it. So I'm seeing as a complaints management team, complaints that have definitely been aided by, Gen AI. So they're really effectively structuring their arguments and why they feel the way they do, which it's not only making it more challenging to respond to, sometimes it's helping because it's really clearly explaining the problem and what they would like us to do about it. Previously, some customers would be able to do that more effectively than others. So actually it can help to really kind of granularize what they would like us to do about something. But a lot of them are using those technologies themselves. So, the complaints I'm seeing are very different than when I started my career. And it might be a kind of few sentences, and sometimes you can tell that they're a bit frustrated as they're writing it. Now it's very structured. It's, it's in a particular way. Not in all cases, but, many of them that we see, you can definitely see the traits from these technologies.
That's so interesting. That's so funny to me that, I don't know, you're having a problem with your bank and you want to write an email or complaint, so you put in, I can just imagine someone really frustrated going, can you tell me how to say this but not so rudely?
That's a good point. It might make them slightly more diplomatic as well.
So, I mean, speaking of, and that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is obviously AI is such a big thing now. We talk about it on all of our podcast episodes. It's so big, and it's coming into every industry. Is there anything specific that you can think of, maybe if you could elaborate on the point that you've just touched on, and maybe a couple more on how AI can change and technology can change the future of banking?
Yeah, sure. And I think beyond the future of banking, probably the future of customer experience in general. So I'm not in any way affiliated, but earlier this year I actually completed a course with the CX Academy, and it's specifically on AI and CX. And it's just, I think, important to keep up with it because it is evolving more rapidly than ever before. And I think in terms of banking, the banking services, if you think about it, haven't really changed for generations, I would say. The banking services I use today are the ones my dad used when he was my age and when he was younger. What's changed quite a lot is how customers interact with banks, the channels they use, and the same as it has in many sectors. For me, we have a hybrid approach because we have our bricks and mortar branches and there's no plans anytime to change that. And we're not a digital only bank. We do want to be accessible to the community. But I think for us, it's about empowering our customers to be as self-sufficient as they can be for their daily banking needs, which is beneficial not just to the business, but definitely to our customers, makes their life way easier. And then being there when we really add value. So kind of those everyday things we can just do ourselves, we do it, and then really being there when we add value. And that includes helping customers use those different channels as well. So self-service, I always say to our teams, doesn't mean on your own. It means we're there to support you if you need it. So that's definitely changing. And then I think an opportunity that will continue evolving in CX, and it's already happening, is the ability to kind of analyze customer feedback in a more intelligent way. Especially the unstructured feedback, the verbatim commentary and so on. Because sometimes that really tells you a story. And again, this is the level of detail that we look into that. We fixed air conditionings in branches because of one comment telling us it wasn't working. And then we find out, oh yeah, we've been reporting that for a while. And next week it's fixed. And the same recently, it doesn't rain often in Malta, not like here today in London, but it does happen. And what tends to happen is when it rains, it pours. And the country's also not built for rain, so it kind of floods quite easily and so on and so on. But recently someone put in the customer feedback terminal, we use the happy or not ones, they put umbrella stand, that's all they wrote. And I said, umbrella stand, that's a funny comment. So I went to see, and it happened to be the branch that's also attached to our head office. And we didn't have an umbrella stand. So I realized that's what they were trying to tell us. So the next week, our facilities team supported us and made sure that any branches that didn't have one, one was put in place.
That's cool.
Such a small change, such a small, cost to the business. But imagine that customer, the next time they return, sees that umbrella stand. Those are those kind of magical moments where they're going to say, that 2-second comment I, took to write. One customer, was enough. And that's why it's not always about the numbers, because that wasn't even a complaint. And it wasn't, a major grievance, but that's something we can easily improve. And also it's better for us because they're not wet umbrellas all across the branch. So, it benefits everyone. So it's just really listening to the feedback. And I think that's the thing that not all companies do as effectively as they could.
And it's so rewarding as a consumer and as a customer to know that your voice is heard within businesses and within companies.
It is. And that's the thing. Again, having worked for many, many years in complaints management, people are not bad. And I always defend if people say, oh, that must be really tough working on complaints or depressing. It can be heavy because you're constantly carrying the weight of everyone's problems. But people are not all screaming at you. They're not all horrible. They just have a problem that needs solving. And they're just everyday people like us. And we all get to that point where sometimes, we just need help with something. And it is really rewarding to be able to turn that around. I mean, I obviously won't say who it is, but we have a customer who was a serial complainer, one of our regulars. And we really got to know her and we really built some great rapport with her, and she's wonderful. And now she sends in more compliments than she's ever sent complaints. And she's on Facebook, you can get the badges. She's one of our top fans.
Oh, wow.
So she's gone from being a regular complainer to one of our biggest advocates, because she never meant any harm to the business. Things weren't always working for her. And when we took note of that and made those changes, she was really, really appreciative of that. So it just shows you why that defensive approach is not the right approach. Customers don't mean harm. If they did, they would just leave or, not even bother complaining. They're trying to tell you that something isn't quite working. And that's valuable for your business. So you have to look past that kind of defensive natural response and say, okay, but is there, merit in what they're saying here, and how can we implement that? And again, if you're not completely sure, be honest with your customers and say, okay, it's something we're working on. We're still trying to find the best approach. But we'll let you know if we do, manage to find something that might work better. And you can even trial ideas with some of those customers. And we've done that more than once, where we say, we're thinking of doing this. What do you think? And again, they'll be really, really engaged to be part of that process. Customers do really like to feel like you are listening to their feedback, to go back to your last point. And it does mean that you'll have really, really engaged customers that do continue sharing feedback because they know you listen to it. The same feedback terminals in our branches, we share the results on the screens in our branches. They're huge digital screens.
That's cool.
So again, and no matter how good or bad it is, we never censor it. Every single month it's refreshed with the previous month's results. So again, they see, it's closing the loop with them, but they see, that we are listening and monitoring what they're telling us.
I love that. How good must it have felt? Because that customer that said, umbrella stand, I guarantee you they walked back in the branch 2 weeks later or whenever it was, and they saw it. I bet they held their head really high that day. And at the end of the day, that is like that's a win. That's a tick for you guys. Because that's, I think, in banking in particular, because it's such a serious business. You ultimately take a responsibility for people's money, which is their livelihood. This is their well-being. It's their future. It's their retirement. It's a huge responsibility.
Pain points.
Exactly.
Stressful.
100%. And it's like if you're not taking that serious and not listening and implementing ideas that are coming to you, it just says a lot. But if you can do it and you can implement, even if it's the micro changes or the really big stuff, it actually makes a huge difference. And I think it's like. I think, unfortunately, banking, because of the severity of what you're doing in terms of the service, I've always thought of it as like it takes a lot to build trust and reputation and like a relationship, and you can lose it in a split second, which is really unfortunate, or however you want to say it, but that is just the price you pay of being a retail bank or a bank in particular. But if you can turn that around and you can then, like you say, act on someone's feedback and deliver a great customer experience, you can lock customers in for life.
Absolutely.
And then you're there with them along this journey of life, which is crazy, but at the heart of all of it is money, and your financial management. It's just such an integral part of our...
You can build trust for decades, generations, because they'll recommend you to their children and so on. And then one poor decision can really dent that trust. And it's important to monitor that as well. Trust levels is something we measure. So it's not, NPS is really important, and it's really important to us. But how trusted you are is also really important, and that's something we actually actively measure. And as you're saying, it's really important. And it's another reason why it's important that your CX teams and your customer feedback teams are included in business discussions, because they often see things that customers won't like or that won't go down well in a different way. My boss always says that. She says, I include you in lots of these discussions because you see things differently. There could be 12 people and you have a different perspective, but it's because we're so in tune with the customer. And we do need to be self-aware that we do have a really internal view of things sometimes of the business, whereas your customer feedback teams, your frontline teams as well, will be really in touch with the customer and will say, no, that's not going to go down well. And sometimes we've decided not to do something because we've, convinced the business it wasn't the right move. A competitor has done it and it's been, a disaster. So you can preempt things going wrong by making sure that your complaints teams, your CX teams are represented in business discussions. Too often in businesses, they're not there. And they aren't included, and they just see the business making changes that they know is not a good idea, that they could have helped, redirect. So it's important to have them there.
Brill.
Yeah, for sure.
Do some quick fire questions.
Let me get my list.
What's your favourite thing about living in Malta?
Oh, my it's a bit cliche, but probably the weather.
Yeah.
We have the other extreme. Sometimes it gets very hot. But it is nice to be able to pretty much go outside any time of the year. In Malta, we get 300 days of sunshine a year. So, slightly different to here.
If you were to travel to one place and you have to live there forever, where would it be? And not Malta.
It's hard to say live there because it is totally different moving somewhere than visiting there. But my bucket list place that I really want to visit is Japan. I'm not sure if I could live there. I mean, for many reasons, the language barrier and their culture is very different. But I would love to go to Japan, but I want to go when I can spend at least, a good few weeks really traveling around, and not just the kind of cities like Kyoto and Tokyo, but also like the mountains and the countryside. It's an amazing country.
I'm reading a Japanese book at the minute, and it's just all
That's
about food, and it's
Yeah.
just making me want to go to Japan just to have the authentic food.
Yeah, you should.
That's cool. I guess the question I have is music. What sort of music are you into, and do you have like a favorite band or artist or something like that?
Oh, I like lots of different music. It
Okay.
really does depend on the day of the week. But
Okay.
on the train on the way here, I like my kind of noughties, kind of, I don't know if it's R&B or kind of pop, but I was listening to All Saints on the way here.
Yeah.
Their playlist, but honestly, every single artist, it would be totally different. I like so many different artists. Yeah, I do like a good girl group from like the early noughties or 90s, and All Saints is quite up there, so I was listening to them on the way here.
Yep.
But it really, really changes.
Yeah. I grew up in a family listening to the Spice Girls.
Yeah.
So I know every Spice Girls song back to front. And when they were touring in the UK, I went with my sister
Yeah.
and my wife and stuff like that. So
I remember.
I
how
can
huge
relate.
they
I'm
were, yeah.
always playing, yeah.
Definitely. No,
90s.
they were a whole movement, I would say.
Yeah.
And I thought they were great.
All Saints are great as well. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
What's one Disney villain that you think was deeply misunderstood?
Ooh. Do you know, I always prefer the villains because I think they're more interesting. And I think Disney's realised that
They've
because a
got a
lot of their...
backstory.
Yeah, like they've got Maleficent now and
Yeah.
Cruella, and they're making all these spin-offs from the villains.
Yeah, that's true.
Deeply misunderstood. Well, Maleficent's a good one because they kind of explored that more with the movies. A lot of them are kind of misunderstood. Sometimes they try to make them a bit one-dimensional, so they were just kind of kind of inadvertently evil, maybe not through their own doing. But I think everyone's got a story to tell, and it's the same with people, and it's the same with customers. If you have a complainant that's aggressive or not behaving the way you think they should, there is always a reason that someone's acting that way. It might not always be you or your organization. It could just be that they're going through, a really difficult time somewhere else. But that's why it's important to be compassionate, because something's driving that.
Yeah.
And it might be an accumulation of things, but it's the same with Disney villains. But I do love Disney films. So I would say most of them are probably somewhat misunderstood.
Brilliant. Well, Scott, thank you again so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure, and we quizzed you a lot, but you had some great answers. So, yeah, thanks for taking the time. And yeah, next time you're back in the UK, if you could bring that Maltese weather back, that would be
Yes.
that'd be lovely.
Thank you both so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I've been really looking forward to it, actually. And it's been worth kind of braving the rain to come in here, to come and see you both. You've been amazing. So thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for listening.
Brilliant.
Great. Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's it.